asking all of you who are here on the webinar live today at different times to share. Of course, we encourage you to share as we're talking. If you hear something that maybe resonates, or maybe something from your own work, maybe you disagree with us, maybe you have a question. So there is the chat feature. There's also the Q&A feature. If you look up in your WebEx toolbar there, you can find them. I will be monitoring both as we go along. We will certainly have opportunities, and Rosie will be asking you, prompting you. I will be as well. And we'll have designated places where we're going to stop and ask you for questions. So think about if you have a question, maybe there's something that we are addressing that you would like us to talk about more, or to dive in deeper on, or maybe there's just something in your own work or life that you think we might be able to comment on, or ask the group to comment on. So definitely want to have that chat and QA feature there, and we'll try to make sure we get to all of those. I believe in the chat area, if you send it to everyone, obviously everyone will be able to see it. That is usually preferred. But of course, if you prefer that comment to go to just one of us, then you'll have to make that designation. All right, enough with the housekeeping. I hate doing all that stuff, but it's important for the WebEx so we can be happy and get the most out of it. So anyways, thank you so much for being on here. You know, I met Rocio through another friend of ours, Eduardo, who's just this kind of maniac for content and culture, and maniac in a good way. And he's always doing awesome stuff. And he connected the two of us, and we hit it off right away. And we said, hey, let's do a webinar, and what could we talk about? And this idea of becoming unstoppable really naturally emerged out of our conversations. And I'm really excited today to talk to you about that. And hopefully we can find some things together that in our own work, in our lives, that we can really implement this in a positive way. Now, hopefully you've been on webinars before, but if you don't know who I am, I'm Chris Dyer. I'm the CEO of People G2. I'm also a remote work expert and advocate. I do a lot of speaking on remote work, on company culture. Wrote the book, The Power of Company Culture, and I have a new book coming out in May. In fact, if anyone is interested in offering, we're doing a lot of cool things with promotions right now. So if you'd like to be a part of the remote work release, and maybe have your company help be featured as a part of this rollout, love to talk to you about that. So if you're interested, let me know. You know how to find me on email or LinkedIn or whatever. But we're going to start with Rosie. I'm going to bring her in and let her introduce herself and talk about her work and what she's been doing. And I'm going to have her kind of kick us off today and begin with this conversation and get us thinking about some of the things that we need to do to become unstoppable. So Rosie, take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Chris. It's always a pleasure to be with you at all times. I'm really excited. My name is Rocio Perez. I'm the founder of Inventiva Consulting. We're an organizational development firm that helps individuals live the life that they love and they desire. What does it look like from a leadership perspective? I've been working with individuals for over 25 years and helping them create that life, just that. What makes their teams tick? What helps them? What stops them? What really motivates them to continue to move forward? And that's what we're here today to talk about. What are the roadblocks that are getting in the way? What is it that we can do that's differently? Now, for most of us, what is it the reason that we're here today? What are those roadblocks that are getting in the way right here, right now? Maybe they're real, maybe they're perceived, maybe we've been seeing them all the time, and especially right now. What does it look like to thrive beyond these roadmaps and beyond these roadblocks right now? We're going to go ahead and get started with the presentation there. Chris, so we can go ahead and click on to the next slide. What is being unstoppable all about? And to me, being unstoppable is being that resourceful person that moves on from where they're at to where they want to be. How do we find a way even when we don't have the way? Maybe we're lacking the freedom and ease that we want. So right here, we have a couple of people. Okay, so we have a number of others that would like to, maybe Chris, we can take a look at the chat real quick, because we're having a number of individuals come on board. Thank you. And it's about being present. What does it look like to be present? What does it look like to be unstoppable in these times? To me, it is to look at how do we develop a relationship with accountability partner. Okay, awesome. Chris, if you can just go ahead and hit the next slide, please.
Yeah, and Rose, it's a little bit hard to hear you. I don't know if you can get closer to the microphone. I want to make sure we can hear you. And I know there's some people that are having a hard time getting in. We are working on that right now. I will work on that in the background, but you can go ahead and continue.
Okay, awesome. Let me go ahead and make sure. Give me one quick second here for us to hook up a different mic. Give me one moment. Can you hear me, Chris? Perfect. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. I know there's a number of individuals that are looking to come in. Do we want to pause in for a minute or two, Chris? Let them come in?
I think we've got it addressed, so you can go ahead.
You've got it. Okay, wonderful. All right. Success and being unstoppable, success isn't a result of spontaneous combustion. This is one of my favorite quotes. We must set ourselves on fire. What does it look to set ourselves on fire all the time? To be successful, to go through, sometimes we're going through things that are maybe difficult in our lives. What are the golden nuggets? We start to take a look at what are the things that we can be successful with, and we're asking you to go ahead and write things that may be important for you as you're listening to them that you can easily implement. Let's go to the next slide, Chris. Thank you. Now, here's bridging the gap, bridging the unstoppable gap, invest in ourselves. That is one of the most important things that any one of us can do. Nobody's here to lead us. Nobody's here to invest in ourselves but ourselves. I think that's one of the most important things, whether that's finding a mentor, being part of a group that is doing extraordinary things in life, or even becoming someone who's being mentored by somebody who may be 10 years ahead of what we're doing. Fostering our capacity and our awareness and capacity to change, what does that look like along the way? We can all transform ourselves at any given point in time. And great example, a tree can only be a tree. A desk can only be a desk. Yet human beings, we have limitless potential. We can do anything and everything that we desire, and it takes time. We can shift, we can transform, we can move from one career to another, and most of the time we can get what we desire. Being incisive and accelerating our insights. How do we accelerate our insights? That may be through masterminds, that may be through conversations with other leaders, power partners. Even a power partner right now in this moment, what difference would it make for someone to be accountable, to hold you accountable, someone that you can potentially even hold accountable along the way? I think one of the greatest ways and things to stay focused on what we desire is to have that vision. Call the future into here now. What does your future look like? What do you want it to look like? How can we envision the future so vividly right here, right now, that we can walk into it? For instance, when I was in university, I wanted to build a business. And I had that vision so clearly that I can even step into it. I can step into that vision. What did it look like? What did it feel like? And that's the question here right now. What would it feel like? What would it look like? What would it sound like? And you know exactly how important it is to have that vision, that it be powerful, that it be strong. Speeding up our personal evolution. I think that's so important. That goes along with accelerating our insights, continuing to transform along the way, creating our own roadmap to leadership. How do we lead ourselves right here, right now? To me, there's 3 types of leadership. One of them being auto leadership. Who am I? Where do I want to go? How do I become intentional? Number 2, what is that intentionality? What is that roadmap for me? How do I get from where I want to be, from here now to where I want to be? How do I get others from where they're at to where they want to be? How do I become even more self-aware in the process? What does that look like for me to be even more self-aware of my own triggers, of what stops me, of what excites me, of what slows me down, of what Even a positive trigger is a trigger. How do I get myself into that great positive state of mind immediately? Taking massive action, using massive leverage. There's one of my favorite examples that I heard of an entrepreneur talk about. She wanted to make a difference in the community and didn't know how. And she looked at hiring people from prisons. How could I hire somebody from a prison where I can make a difference? How do I give somebody a fresh start in life? And as she was interviewing this individual who had been a drug dealer, former drug dealer, says, I have nothing in common with him. Continues to interview him, and at one moment she stops and says, where's the common ground? What can I learn from this individual right here, right now? And she said, how did you market? She was hiring for marketing. How did you market to individuals that you were selling drugs to? Something so simple, right? He knew his audience. He knew exactly where they were at. He knew everything about them. He knew what we call in marketing psychographics, what touched, moved, inspired him. He knew the ages. He knew where they spent their time with. All those things, we can leverage someone else's adversity. We can leverage anything that they may know from a cultural perspective. People who have been through adversities and who think differently than we do can solve problems very, very differently. Taking a new look at the way that we look at things will definitely change things along the way. Testing, tracking, and tweaking. To me, even if we have the best strategy in the world, we may be in a different environment. COVID, we're all in the same environment. We're all going through the same things. What does it look like for us right now, trying to embrace those experiences? To say, how do I take the communication that I had prior, that may have been in person, to an online platform? How do I continue to leverage? And we know that these are new systems. We can continue to test, track, and tweak until we get to where we want to be. The hardest thing any one of us, and I'll ask you to write it down, any one of us must do in our life is to think. The hardest thing, and I'm going to repeat it again, the hardest thing that any one of us must do is to think. What happens when we think, right? It's easy to take a look at problems and say, that's easy. Let me go ahead and give my 3 best answers, and that's great. And yet, to take a look at where have I been? Where am I now in this moment? Where do I want to be? And is who I'm being in this moment going to take me to where I want to be? And I would say in my professional experience, the vast majority of the time, it is no. It is not likely that it's going to take us exactly to where we want to be. Maybe there's a great opportunity for us to connect at a different level. Maybe it is becoming someone who, for instance, myself, when COVID hit, I was such an extrovert. I was out at events, and whether it was 40, 50 events, stage time, meetings a week, to having screen time. All of us have experienced that, right? How did I tweak my approach? And for me was to find other ways to communicate, and that was through phone calls. Sometimes we were all completely zoomed out. Maybe it was engaging even more in social media and what that looked like. And every day it was different. Now that we've gotten a lot more comfortable with COVID, we're still disconnected. How do we find other ways to connect and to pick up the phone and have conversations, authentic conversations? And even in relationships, what's working here now? How is it working? Why is it not working? How do I tweak my approach to make sure that I maintain on top of these relationships that are so important? Let's go on to the next slide. And in the meantime, as we're looking to close this gap, how do we invest in ourselves? And I think I can't say that enough. How do we invest in ourselves? The most important thing as we're going through roadblocks. Maybe it's time to hire a consultant. Maybe it is time to take a look at different groups that we can join and especially being that mentor, because we get to see ourselves outside of ourselves when we're helping someone else. Leading yourself, being intentional about developing your awareness. I've had individuals that I've had the privilege to work with who were extraordinary leaders, and the company could not afford to lose them, and they couldn't afford to lose the people that they were leading. At times, as this individual started to become more aware that he wasn't being empathetic, he wasn't being authentic, he wasn't sharing himself. He never told anyone about his military and life experiences, and he was always on top of every job that he ever had. And therefore, when he would walk into the room where his employees were at and team members, people would just scatter. He wasn't aware of his impact, that people didn't want to connect with him. They didn't feel like he was authentic or empathetic or vulnerable, to the degree that he was about to fire someone who had a health crisis. That person had only been there 6 months, had left work twice, was getting written up, and this individual finally stopped, and we'll call him Joe for now. Joe finally stopped and said, "Is everything okay? Is everything okay?" And his team member revealed that he had been ill. He had a health crisis. And that every time he left work, he was leaving to his doctor's office. A simple question. How do we stop and be authentic and empathetic and have that relatability with another individual? To stop and have a 20-minute coffee. Right now, a virtual coffee. What's your superpower? What's the hardest thing that you've had to go through during COVID? Being authentic and sharing ourselves really helps us to build that relatability. We talked about owning your past, understanding your past, and also owning it. That's the good, the bad, the ugly. That helps us to be even more present in this moment. When I give my talks, hey, I was a runaway. I made it from a 12-year-old runaway to leading people all over the world. I own that. I take that with me. That's given me an opportunity to think differently, to connect with people differently, to bring my humanity. It's one of the greatest things that's missing in our work is that we're not embracing our humanity. We're not bringing ourselves to work. Therefore, what we contribute, we think it's only outside of work, right? We contribute. What's outside of work is outside of work. What's inside of work is inside of work. Yet we know right now that there's roughly about 78% of people that are not feeling psychologically safe to make a contribution. And especially during COVID. Am I doing the right thing? Even hearing people around the world who say, hey, I'm not sure if they're downsizing. What's happening here? How do I take my power back in this moment? Another thing that I found so useful, and this is as my awareness continued to develop, was making feedback my best friend. And to understand if I'm hearing somebody say something 2 or 3 different times, to stop and to say thank you. Thank you. Maybe I wasn't aware of what I was doing. Maybe I wasn't aware that I wasn't including 3 or 4 people in the conversation. And this was great because I could be very focused on the person that's in front of me. I am right in front in a networking meeting, and that's the only person that's existing to me, yet there's 5 or 6 individuals. And when I became aware that I wasn't aware of what was going on, now I took that feedback and saying, hey, Joe, Mary, let me introduce you. Every time someone would come into that circle, I had that opportunity to connect with them. That's just one example of feedback that we continue to move forward. Look at feedback as our best friend. To me, it's helped me become unstoppable and own your unstoppable nature, each and every one of us. It's what we tell ourselves. I'll share a quick story about my grandson, Emilio, who's 5 years old. And I remember Emilio a year ago who couldn't catch a ball. And he was crying. He'd try to reach for the ball, and he'd put his arms out, and he couldn't catch it. The next week, I came over, and I said, what is it that Emilio is telling himself? He was 4 at the time. And I wasn't too sure. Why is he not catching the ball? And then I started to hear the conversation. I'm like, what's going on, Emilio? I can't catch the ball. I can't catch the ball. And I said, Emilio, you can catch the ball. Repeat after me. I've got this. And Emilio started to repeat, I've got this. Who's got this, Emilio? I've got this. Who's got this? I've got this. Who's got this? I've got this. I throw the ball, and he catches it. And he flies across the room, and he's like, I've got it. Sometimes it's the conversation that we have with ourselves. And it's easy to get lost in these moments where we need so much human connection that we're lacking it, that we're lacking authenticity. Maybe we're lacking to even have time with family and friends. Something as simple as that. Chris, let's go to the next slide. And here's the important keys right here. Know your why. What is your why? Why are you doing the things that you're doing right now? For who are you doing the things that you're doing? Maybe it's your son, your daughter, your family, your husband, your wife. What? Maybe even for yourself. What is it? And especially for yourself. I think we put ourselves last on that list. Take a look at how do we disrupt our patterns. One great way to start to get a new, different perspective on life. Drink your coffee a different way, in a different place, in a different spot, at home. Whether you normally comb your hair with your left hand, comb it with your right one. Switch up. Start to disrupt the patterns and actually start to bring in creativity. Having the real conversations is also very, very important. A lot of the time, it is what we don't say that impacts who we be in the world. We may not say, hey, I don't have the project. I didn't have the project when I needed it from you. Maybe you're taking too long. Maybe I don't have the knowledge, skills, and abilities to be able to work on this project. What is the real conversation that's getting in the way of our communication and us being able to deliver things? Sometimes it's even overthinking. And what does overthinking look like? Just close your eyes for just a moment and imagine a little boy that's inside of a swimming pool holding on to the rope. He's holding on for dear life, and he's kicking and screaming, and he's like, I'm drowning. And mom comes over and stands him up. And little boy realizes that the water's up to his stomach. How many times, with a new, different perspective, would we make different decisions in that moment? We talked about bridging our own gaps. We're the only ones that can bridge our own gaps. Be a mentor, be a mentor, and be a mentor. And that's one of the greatest things. I think I've gotten extraordinary things from being a mentor. Having a mentor was really nice, and it helped me grow. Being a mentor helped me expand because it helped me auto-reflect, and it's helped countless others auto-reflect about who they're being, how they're being, and how they're moving forward. Being resourceful along the way. What does resourcefulness look like? When we were talking about the individual who was out of prison, what an amazing experience to be able to tap into people's experiences in their life. How can we be resourceful? How can we repurpose things? Being relentless in our approach. Maybe it doesn't work because we still need to tweak it. Maybe there's one thing, and it's always a 2mm tweak in my experience. Once we tweak it, life changes. Being resilient, continuing, if you're an entrepreneur, you're somebody who's inside of a corporation, being resilient and continuing to stay the course. And understand, again, that our adversities are one of the greatest things. Invest in yourself, and you will be more than happy that you did, because we take ourselves with us everywhere we go. Everything that we've ever become, it's because of who we are being in every moment. And I'm going to ask you to turn it to the next one, Chris, and go from there. And then think about, what are the takeaways? What specifically is it that you are taking away from this conversation, from this presentation right here, right now? What does it look like? What specifics are you taking away? What are the next 3 things that you can do getting out of this webinar and saying, hey, I'm going to take action? I think that's one of the most powerful things that any one of us can do after we learn something or after we experience something. And it may be, we've already seen this, we've heard it. How about we hear it through a different sound and see it through a different lens and experience it through a different experience in ourselves? Go to the next slide. And do we have any questions here now, or do we want to wait for questions at the end, Chris?
Yeah, we did have one question.
Thank you.
From Kate, and she was asking if there's any tools or strategies for navigating past barriers.
Most definitely, and there's so many tools and barriers. I have the book titled Unstoppable: 7 Steps for Becoming a More Intentional Leader. I will share some other books that have helped me, and that's The Magic of Thinking Big. The Magic of Thinking Big by Claude Bristol has been an extraordinary book that has helped me see myself in a future and live in that future. To understand, to auto-reflect, to start asking myself the question, here's what I would ask myself: what is it that I'm not seeing? Or what is it that I'm experiencing? Because it may be something that we're experiencing that if I was to experience differently would change the course of my life right now. One other thing that I'd love to do is a forgiveness exercise for myself, because sometimes the biggest thing is that we don't forgive ourselves for the action that we took or the action that we didn't take or whatever that may be. I forgive myself for not making the phone call to Michael when I said I was going to call Michael. Download that. I promise you, as you go through that process, that simple tool every single morning, within 2 to 3 days of just downloading yourself, what you forgive yourself and what you forgive others specifically. I forget Mary Jane for X, Y, and Z. That will help us release and become even more aware and more present.
Well, that was really great, Rosie. I appreciate you walking us through all of that. That's sort of the first part of our webinar today. We have some more still to bring to you, but I do want to certainly ask, what did you all hear? Is there anything specifically that you heard from her so far that maybe resonated with you or you want to kind of call out? Please put that in the Q&A or the chat area. We love to certainly see that. And so we can understand, and the group, the webinar group can really start to think about that. I think there was some other things. What should we maybe think about avoiding in creating relatability in our teams? That was something that has come up a few times in our conversations. So, Rosie, what do you think we should be doing or trying to avoid?
So trying to avoid is getting too quickly into conversations. Let's get to know each other and get to know what is that person's story? Where do they come from? And in my experience and so many other people's experiences, when we get to the depths of it, to know that maybe it's Mary Jane who had an amazing career and lost it all. To connect through our humanity, to listen first and speak second. To be able to acknowledge individuals, that's really, really important, right? We're all humans and we don't typically see ourselves and understand our values as human, that human-to-human connection, that authenticity, that connection. Things to avoid is walking by someone and not taking a moment to say something. Somebody says, hi, hey, I need some help. Be present with them. I may not be able to help them in this moment. We may not be able to stop and say, it's so important for me. Let's schedule a time because I want to give it the time that's important.
And what else should we be doing as a regular habit to be unstoppable? And I want to thank, it looks like Michelle and Fernando have been putting a lot in the Q&A area. I don't know if everyone can see the Q&A area or not, or if that's only to us as a panelist. So if anyone has comments, I would definitely put it in the chat area if you're comfortable with everyone seeing the chat. And thank you, Kate. Looks like she put in that she hears the importance of intentionality. But what else should we be thinking about as a regular habit to be unstoppable?
As a regular habit, take care of yourself. Be selfish. Be selfish and take care of yourself first, because we have nothing to give to anyone if we're not in alignment. If we're running around depleting ourselves from our own energy, maybe we're not even relaxing. I can tell you there was a moment in my life that I was working 20 hours a day, not even acknowledging myself. I was giving my time to everyone and everything to everyone except for myself. That's called burnout. That is called burnout. So have a morning routine. What does that morning routine look like? Is it exercise? Is it journaling? To me, those are the top 3 things. I get up, I exercise every morning. I love journaling. I know that something is off in my day and in my world. It's probably because I didn't do those two things. Meditation and being able to see myself throughout my day is one of the most amazing things that I've ever done, because I can walk through the day and walk in flow throughout.
Absolutely. Well, I think you've done such a great job of kind of centering us or kind of channeling this very deep kind of, I almost want to say spiritual, right? But this really deep reflection into us. And I'm going to kind of maybe now take the conversation to, if we take that and we can understand who we are and how we can be personally unstoppable, how do we go in and make sure that we are creating the right framework for our teams, for our people, and bringing that energy in the right way into our work so that we can, when I think about being unstoppable, I also think about, well, if I'm going to be unstoppable, I want everyone who reports to me to be unstoppable. I want every person who I influence to be unstoppable. I want them to connect in that way as well. And so some of the things that we should really be thinking about is this idea of validation from recognition. So I did want to ask you this kind of simple question. If I asked your team or asked your boss, what you did to make them a success last week, would they know? Now, I've asked this question a lot, and sometimes people know, but I find that most people don't. They would say, I don't know if my boss would know what I did to make him or her a success last week. I don't know if my team would be able to tell you that. And that is a really, really big issue. If we don't provide the proper recognition, consistent and regular recognition, sort of this validation that we understand what everyone has been doing on the team to make us a success, we are limiting our ability to validate them as a person and to create that opportunity for us to say thank you, to pat them on the back, to celebrate in their success, or even to give them the support and maybe to virtually hold their hand through a difficult situation, through a mistake. Maybe they didn't land that client they wanted. Maybe that customer interaction didn't go the way they wanted, but to provide them that opportunity to help them grow and to be better. And so we have to do that to remember we have to validate people, validate whatever's happening in the world. Again, I'm not asking you to validate them to give them a participation trophy every time they do something. I'm saying to think about what it is, the work that they're doing, and how we can recognize what they did and help them either get better or to celebrate if what they did was awesome. Does your team know that you appreciate them? Do they know what you appreciated? If they don't, you have got to go back and make sure. It's so easy to forget, to just sort of let all the other things going on in our world take over. And we forget to just tell the team member we work next to or in meetings with all the time, I appreciate you. Geez, that thing you did, I know you're great at talking clients from, who are angry to getting them happy. I want you to know what an awesome job you did on that last call. Right? Or whatever that scenario is. We can only control our behaviors. So if we want to be unstoppable, we want our team to be unstoppable, we have to demonstrate those behaviors. We have to create that space. That's so important for them to have. Now, one of the things that we can really think about as a roadblock, we think about, well, I'm here, I'm at point A, and I want to go to point Z. And in that scenario, it's so easy for people to say, well, that's too hard. How do I go? And I loved your example of your grandson trying to catch a ball, right? And so he maybe tried so many times that it just seems so difficult. How was I ever going to get there? But really, he had practiced and practiced and practiced, and he was frustrated, but he had practiced, right, many, many times. We have to stop thinking about our success, our growth, the change that we want being an A to Z process, because it is not. It is A to B and B to C and C to D and so on and so forth. There's a really great story. The reason I have this gentleman on a bike here, it's a fantastic story about the British cycling team and what they were able to do by making small changes. implemented this idea of the aggregation of marginal gains. And what this is how do we make small, tiny changes, 1% improvements in some area without getting 1% or more worse in any other area. So what they did was, and they were not a good cycling team when they started this process. No Tour de France's, no medals in the Olympics. And when they started this, they said, well, what's the perfect tire pressure? What's the right diet? How do you wash your hands properly to make sure the athletes stay healthy? What's the correct, height of the seat? They looked at everything and made tiny little changes. They did not change their athletes. They didn't change their coaches. They didn't change the amount of hours they trained. They just made tiny little changes over time, and they, up until the last Tour de France, they had won every Tour de France after that. They won all the gold medals in the Olympics when it was hosted in London. And so think about success as the accumulation of tiny little changes over and over and over and over again. If that still seems too big, think about a jar. And if you put your loose change in that jar, how long until that jar is full? Right? It's not going to fill up in a day. It's not going to fill up in a week, or maybe even not in a month. But eventually it will be filled. It will be filled. And that's how we have to think about our work. We have to think about how we can be unstoppable by making those tiny little changes every day, working on ourselves, reading that few pages of a book. Maybe we don't have time to read books. You have time to read 2 pages, right? If you only can read 2 or 3 pages a day, at least you're working towards that goal. The other thing that I wanted to make sure we talked about, and this really is connected to Kate's question about tools and strategies for really navigating past barriers. I want to make sure everyone is aware of this exercise called bonding that I learned, and I talk about it all the time because it's one of the most impactful and incredible things that leaders can do to connect with their people on a human level. So what you want to do in any meeting, and we do this meetings that are 30 minutes or more, we don't do them in short meetings, but any longer meeting, everyone goes around the room and says, how are you showing up right now? Now, this is a human question, meaning I'm asking how they are, the person coming into this meeting. Usually it's I'm doing good, I'm tired, I'm worked, I have a lot to do today. Sometimes it's my son has been sick, he's been up all night the last 2 nights, I'm exhausted. Or I just found out my grandmother's really ill. Or someone I'm very close to me in my friend group just passed away, right? We can extract information about the people we're meeting with to make decisions about the meeting. Maybe this meeting can go on as planned. Maybe some people are really struggling and this is not that important of a meeting. Let's postpone. And now I need to go back and work with that person because they're struggling. They're clearly in a spot where they're never going to be good for this meeting. Maybe I just need to excuse them. If they don't need to be here, I'm really sorry you're struggling. Why don't you take 30 minutes and go do some self-care? We got this handled. We'll send you the notes. That kind of emotional, kind of intuitiveness is something that leaders often don't think about doing. Now, when the meeting's done, we ask, how are you leaving? And this is how you find out if you had the same meeting that they thought they had. Often I thought, well, geez, this is a great meeting. Everyone really liked my idea. This was perfect. And they all went, I don't understand. I'm leaving this meeting totally confused. I feel like, this is not really what we're supposed to be doing. And it's like, whoa, I did not have the same meeting you had. Help me understand, everyone. What am I missing here? What do we need to do? Oh, you don't understand this process? Okay, well, let's have a new meeting, or I'm going to send you some information to help them where they were confused. If we leave the meeting thinking it was good or it was bad, but they have an opposite reaction to the meeting, we're all leaving totally disconnected. But this is a way for us to get alignment very quickly. Now, super important though, if you are the most senior person in the room, you need to go last for each of these questions. I'm the CEO of my company, and if I walk into a meeting and say, I'm showing up super happy and I'm way excited, do you think anyone's going to share that they're down, that they're sad, that they're struggling? Of course not. I've just sucked all of the air out of the room with my happiness, right? Or if I come in and I'm totally down and upset and I'm miserable, you think they're going to share that they're happy? No. So leaders need to go last. In the military, leaders eat last. You need to let everyone else go first. Let them share first, and then you can go. It's still important for you to share, but you need to read the temperature of the room with the people you're meeting with before you then, as the more senior person, share. Make sure we're upping our game with understanding. If something is important, repeat it. Repeat it, repeat it. Make sure that we get validation by repeating things back to people 3 times. This is really, really important. If we're hearing something, if we think that I was talking to Rocio and she was telling me she's upset about a client, and I'm not going to repeat it back to her. So you're telling me this client's really upsetting you. She might, they're not upsetting me. What they're asking me to do is upsetting me because I don't know if I want to do. So you continue to ask questions to really dive into, am I really hearing them correctly? We want to ask key questions to clarify. Why are you upset? How will this affect you? When will this need to be decided? Ask clarifying questions to really make sure you understand what someone is telling you, or your employees are telling you. And ask them to summarize back. This is one of my favorite things to do if someone is maybe kind of coming into a conversation a little hot, and then they're talking and they're a little upset or they're excited. Maybe it's a happy thing. Once they're done, I go, you said a lot. Could you summarize that back to me in a couple sentences? And boom, they all of a sudden get really clear. They say exactly what is important. And you realize all the other stuff was just, a bit of emotion, a bit of excitement, good or bad. And then you really know what's important to them. So make sure we're really upping our game with understanding if we want to be unstoppable. We have to take on that responsibility that when someone is talking, it is our responsibility to understand what they are telling us. It's not it seems like it should be their job to communicate it how they want to be heard, but it's actually our ears, and we have the responsibility to get it right. We also have the responsibility as leaders to deal with some really important cognitive biases. If you bring a bunch of people into a room or bring them onto a Zoom call at 11:30 their time, right, 30 minutes before lunch, all of the cognitive bias work, and Amos Tversky, Danny Kahneman, you can read The Undoing Project or Thinking Fast and Slow. They did this incredible amount of work. And what they found was that if people are hungry, they tend to give you their default answer. And for most people, their default answer is no. In fact, they did a big study on how judges make rulings in parole hearings. And they found that the judges were almost always said no when they were hungry. So if you started off your case at the beginning of the day, you're more likely to get a yes. If you got your case heard right after lunch, more likely to get a yes. And the little bell curves in between that time. So right before lunch, almost always they were told no. If you bring your people together right before they're about to eat lunch and ask them to make decisions and ask them to change behaviors, they're going to tell you no. So have your meeting at a different time. Ask them to bring their lunch to that meeting. If you're back in your office at some point, bring them pizza, right? And then ask them to make changes to their behaviors. Their brains are interfering with their emotions. Also, if the room is too hot and too cold, this is why I love remote work, because everyone can control their own thermostat. But when you go back to the office at some point, if people are in a freezing cold room or a very, very warm environment, they would do the same thing. Their brain is worried about temperature. They will just tell you no, what their default answer, and they won't really be engaged to what you're saying. So make sure that they're comfortable. Make sure we're dealing with their physical needs, that they're not hungry, if you really want to connect with people in a deep way. And finally, make sure that we are finding ways to say yes. This is the most fundamental thing that I ever did to be more successful, to have more things happen, that more of the goals that I set for myself achieved, was to say yes to everything. Now you might go, whoa, Chris, I can't say yes to everything. What if every employee asks me for a raise? What if, think of all the crazy scenarios. You can say yes to anything. And let me tell you how. Yes, and yes, but. If your employee came to you and said, I would like to start selling cocaine out of the basement, that seems like a pretty crazy idea. That's illegal. We wouldn't want to do that, right? How could you possibly say yes to such an absurd request? Well, you could say yes, but you're going to have to get the laws changed, right? Go get the laws changed, we can talk about it. I still found a way to say yes, even that's a ridiculous example. Someone comes to you and says, I would like a raise. Yes, but here are the things you have to do. Here are the things that must occur in order for you to get to the point that you can have a raise. You're still saying yes. You're not saying no. I had people asking me to speak in far places and to be involved in projects I would have normally had said no to. I just started saying yes, and that started connecting me to all these other people. Wonderful opportunities. Find a way. I challenge you to think about if you could, for the rest of the week, say yes to every question answered to you or offered to you. How it might change your life. It might change how people interact with you, how they view you. And you always have the and the but to protect you, right? Someone's not going to take advantage of you. Think about how that might make you more unstoppable. So, Rosie, let's bring you back in here. And I certainly want to ask the audience what they heard here, if there was anything that they're going to take away. And I know, Rosie, you had some questions for me.
Most definitely. Well, first of all, I want to acknowledge you, Chris. You bring in so many amazing things. I love the acknowledgement part of it. We don't get acknowledged as adults for our contributions, right? When a person's acknowledged, they feel like they are on top of the world and they're willing to be able to do anything and everything because anything is possible. I just want to highlight a couple of things and then ask you the question. Celebration. We don't celebrate enough, do we? We don't celebrate the successes, even that 2-millimeter tweak or what you talked about, that 1% improvement. How about we celebrate that? Because that's only going to create even more, right? More desire to create even more success. I love the Hojar concept. Imagine every positive thing that we say to an individual. We were to have a positive jar, even to ourselves, humanity. I love the power of the question, asking questions over and over again. And the food, I love that, Chris. I use that example as well. It's so important. We don't have meetings. We don't have events. If there's no food, there is no event. Number one key thing for every event, there's food, because we can't think. And we're not going to give you the best. And no one, not Chris, not Rocio, not Eduardo, not anyone. We won't give you the best of who we are unless we're taking care of our human basic needs. So with that being said, think about what specifically is it that you heard in this conversation? What else can organizations, and these are questions for you now, Chris, what else can organizations do to help them prepare for roadblocks, being more intentional about these times that we're going through right now?
One of the things that I think organizations really need to do is practice how we're going to deal with roadblocks. Practice disagreeing. You think that people are going to come to you as the boss or as the leader of a team, and they're going to tell you, I don't agree with this, or I think this isn't going to work, but there isn't that psychological safety. Even with people who have worked together for years, it's not there. You have to practice it. So you have to bring people into a meeting and say, I want everyone to practice, telling me that I'm wrong, right? I want two people in this group to be the devil's advocate. Even if this is the best idea in the world, I need two of you to be the devil's advocate. We do a thing called Tsunami planning meetings once a month, where each of our teams practice disagreeing and arguing and debating a topic on a fake thing. What would happen if, insert the scenario that hasn't happened, and they practice with each other what they would do and what they think, and disagreeing and brainstorming, because it's safe, because it's not real, right? Mm-hmm. And then they learn, well, my boss isn't going to fire me for disagreeing, and my teammates aren't going to laugh at me, right? And I realize it's okay. Everything's going to work out. So when it's for real, then I feel comfortable coming and raising my hand and saying, you know what, this is a roadblock here. We need to deal with this.
Mm-hmm. And that's so powerful, right? When we can have that authentic conversation to say, hey, what would happen? And even getting in somebody else's shoes. What would it look like to get in somebody else's shoes? To be the person that disagrees and be okay with it. I know the first time that I went through that exercise, I'm like, wow, wearing all different hats, the energy that it took. And to authentically understand if it's my job to save somebody money, if that's my job, what is my argument? Or somebody else to push the project forward, to see it all differently. Now, Chris, how do you encourage people to contribute more often and the best that they can in a world that we're saying that there's more than 78% of people are not feeling psychologically safe to make those contributions at work? How do we encourage them to do that?
So contribute kind of has a couple different meanings, right? Do we mean give their ideas? Do we mean to celebrate success? What is it we mean by contribute? So I think that's important. We need to define that for whatever your situation is. I find if people are willing to contribute to the process of recognition, right, if they're willing to recognize, they're willing to go around and celebrate other people's successes, that's a starting point. So we all are doing that. We all feel like we are empowered and a part of that process to say thank you. That's the first thing you have to have. Then people start to feel inclined. We practice, as I talked about before, we practice that disagreeing and raising our hand and contributing. And then in real life situations, we have to make sure, leaders have to be very attuned that if we are not hearing from everybody, if we're not hearing from certain people, that we have to go back and work with them and coach them to say, hey, in the next meeting, give them that feed forward. In the next meeting, I really want to hear from you. Your opinion is valuable to me. I want to hear what you have to think. I want to hear you talking. And you can even map. You can have someone sit in the meeting and actually do a little bit of this mapping. Every time someone talks, they do a little tally mark. Every time someone talks to a particular person, do a little tally mark. Now, if I'm the CEO in the group and I'm doing most of the talking, and when I'm not talking, everyone's talking to me, that would freak me out. That would scare me to death, because that means there is no crosstalk, right? I'm talking or they're only talking to me. That means they're not really contributing. I need people talking all over that meeting because we feel safe, we're comfortable collaborating with each other as equals, not in some weird hierarchy thing. Does that make sense?
Yes, and that's so fascinating, because I know in working with large companies, global companies, one of the greatest things that they're looking for is the contributions, because we're not going to make it out into the next level unless we have everybody's thinking on board. What does that thinking look like? That diversity of thought, diversity of experience, diversity of even culture, and anything and everything that we have there. What does it look like in the world? And to bring all of us into work. It's not just let's go ahead and bring this part of my professional life. Let me go ahead and bring my whole creativity, what excites me, what really lights me on fire. And to be unstoppable, we're the ones that must set ourselves on fire, right? We're the ones that must ignite that fire every day. And therefore, it's so important to do self-care. It's so important to find our own way to meditate or to align or exercise, whatever it is that's important for us every single morning. I know one thing, as I was traveling all over the world, to say, hey, the one key thing that's consistent is my morning routine. I have no idea what is going to happen the moment that I step outside that door, and that does not matter. The only thing that matters is how do I align myself here now and give to me first so I can give to others. So I can give, how about I give the best of me to me first? That way I can also give the best to others.
Right, absolutely. Well, we're almost out of time here. I want to make sure if anyone has any specific questions for either of us that we did not hit, now is your opportunity to please put that in. There's quite a few people giving some wonderful comments and sharing it on their own. I really, really appreciate that. So biggest takeaway for me today, I'm going to read one of these, is to think about disrupting my own company's patterns. Do you have suggestions on patterns to disrupt in a remote team work environment to boost engagement? So I will definitely say if you want to boost engagement, you want to disrupt patterns, it's to ask people. You should literally meet with your team and say, how do we do this better, right? To get their feedback. It's really hard to say, well, I think we should do this, and so I'm going to go force this onto them. Start with them first. Get them to tell you. Get them to tell you what a good meeting looks like to them. What does a good opportunity look like to them for when they can come and raise their hand and contribute and do that? That's a great starting point, I think, for anyone. We got a lot of good comments in there. Thank you all so much for all the wonderful comments. You can keep putting in questions if you have it. I want to make sure we do the last little bit of housekeeping. I do have a remote course if anyone is interested. There's a little code there, CD50. You can go to chrisdyer.com if you're interested. A lot of what we talked about, a lot of things I talked about there are in there. It's a complete course on how to be a remote leader if you need that. And I want to thank People G2, which is our sponsor, that hosts this webinar, which allowed everyone to be on here for free today. People G2, check them out if you need background checks or drug screening or any of those other services. Thank you so much. And thank you all so much for being here. And we will be sending this out as a video. You'll get a complete copy of this and the deck. So if you're interested in knowing more, if you're interested in talking to me, there's my information. If you would like to reach out to Rocio, there's her information as well. And we thank you all so much for being here. Rocio, any final comments before we go?
Be unstoppable. Be unstoppable. Let's listen first and truly listen. Be present in the moment and hear the intention of who it is that they are, what they desire, where they're going. And let's be those relentless individuals that help anyone get to where they want to be. As we help others, we help ourselves, and everyone grows together.
Well, I'm going to leave it at that. I can't do any better than that. So thank you, everyone, for being here today. We hope you enjoyed the webinar, and look out for the next one. We'll be sending that out here very soon. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.